Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophets Judges chapter 16 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're going to be looking at the final, fateful days of Samson. This is a deeply chronological walkthrough of what is honestly one of the most dramatic historical narratives you'll find in the entire text. We're talking about immense physical power, deep emotional betrayal, and the really severe consequences of straying from your calling. We'll be sticking strictly to the simple meaning, the peshat of the text, really focusing on who's involved, what actually happens, and why it matters to us. Okay, let's dive right into this, because the contrast in Samson's journey is just incredibly stark. Up to this point in the book of Judges, Samson has basically been a one-man army, right? An unstoppable force against the Philistines. We're looking at a man who starts the specific chapter with a completely superhuman physical advantage. Yet he ends up in the absolute most vulnerable, tragic state imaginable. How does that even happen? What are the exact steps that lead to such a massive downfall? Well, to fully understand this, we need to look directly at the text of Judges chapter 16, verse by verse. And it starts right at the beginning with an astonishing display of his baseline strength. Section 1, the gates of Gaza. So, our text opens with verses 1 through 3, and it immediately establishes exactly what Samson was physically capable of. The setting is Gaza, which is a major stronghold deep inside Philistine territory. And remember, the Philistines are the primary enemies of the Israelites at this time. Samson goes there, sees a prostitute, and word gets out. The people of Gaza are told Samson is here, so they surround the place and lie in wait for him all night at the city gate. They think they finally got him trapped. The plan is super simple, just wait until dawn and then kill him. But, as you'll see, things do not go according to their plan. Samson doesn't wait for dawn. The text tells us he only lay there until the middle of the night. Then he gets up, walks right up to the city gate, and keep in mind, ancient city gates were massive. These were impenetrable defensive structures made of heavy wood and metal. Samson takes hold of the doors, and he doesn't just push them open, no. He tears them loose. The doors, the two heavy posts, bar and all, he literally rips the security of the entire city right out of the ground. And he doesn't just drop them there either. The text says he lifted them onto his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. That is a journey of many miles, mostly uphill. It's a massive, truly superhuman feat of strength. This event sets our stage perfectly. Physically, Samson absolutely cannot be contained. He is invincible to physical force. But it also hints at this really reckless lack of spiritual caution, right? He's venturing into dangerous enemy territory simply to satisfy his own desires, which makes what happens next so deeply shocking. Section 2, Delilah and the Bribe. Now we transition to verses 4 and 5. Sometime later, Samson is in the valley of Sorek, and it's here that he falls in love with a woman named Delilah. Unlike that physical ambush in Gaza, this situation presents a very different, much more subtle kind of trap. The rulers of the Philistines, there were 5 of them in total, see a prime opportunity here. They know for a fact they can't defeat him in hand-to-hand combat, so they decide to attack him from the inside, through the person he loves. They go to Delilah with a very specific proposition. They tell her to lure him into showing her the secret of his great strength so they can figure out how to overpower him, tie him up, and subdue him. And here is the massive incentive. Each one of the rulers promises to give her 1,100 shekels of silver. If you do the math, that's 5,500 shekels total. This is a staggering number. To put that into perspective, in the ancient world, this was a king's ransom, an absolute fortune. Delilah's motive for betrayal is overwhelmingly financial. The text makes it perfectly clear that her affection is completely compromised. This is a calculated, deeply transactional betrayal. Section 3, prodding for the secret. And this brings us to verses 6 through 14, which is this incredible period of escalating tension. Delilah begins her active, repeated attempts to discover how Samson can be overpowered. Let's move through exactly how she tests his boundaries step by step, because it really builds. First, she just asks him directly. Samson decides to play a dangerous game and gives her a totally false answer. If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man. So she actually does it, with Philistine men hiding right there in the room, and she yells, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you!" He wakes up and snaps those strings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it gets close to a flame. Naturally, she complains that he made a fool of her and lied, and she asks again. For his second lie, he says, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." Once again, she ties him up, men are waiting, she calls out, and once again, he snaps the new ropes off his arms like they're nothing but threads. But notice what happens on the third try. She asks again, and he says, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." Do you see what he's doing here? He is playing with fire. He is inching dangerously closer to the actual truth, which involves his hair. She does it while he sleeps, tightens his hair in the loom with a pin, and calls out again. He wakes up and just easily pulls up the pin in the loom, dragging the whole heavy weaving apparatus out with his hair. Which brings us to verse 15. The physical tests have all failed, right? So Delilah shifts her strategy to intense emotional manipulation. She says to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." The text tells us that with such nagging, she prodded him day after day. She just doesn't stop. She weaponizes his affection for her. She wears him down psychologically. Until, as the text explicitly states in verse 16, he was tired to death. Physical strength is completely useless against this kind of psychological and emotional exhaustion. He is completely worn down by the constant, relentless pressure. Section 4. The Nazarite vow broken. Now, in verse 17, Samson makes his fatal admission. His exhaustion leads directly to the climax of this manipulation, and he finally surrenders the truth. He tells her everything. He says, "No razor has ever been used on my head, because I have been a Nazarite set apart to God since birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." We really need to understand this simply. The whole concept of a Nazarite means being dedicated, separated, and holy to God. The uncut hair is the physical symbol of that divine vow and covenant. His strength isn't just some magic trick hidden in his muscles. It's a direct result of God's presence due to his consecration. By giving up this secret to someone who has repeatedly, actively tried to destroy him, he is fundamentally compromising his sacred vow to God.
Section 5. Capture and blindness.
What follows in verses 18 through 21 is, quite honestly, one of the most devastating sequences in the text. Delilah knows immediately that he has finally told her the truth. She sends word to the Philistine rulers to come back one more time, and they return with the silver right in their hands. First, she puts him to sleep on her lap. Then, she calls a man in to shave off the 7 braids of his hair. As this happens, his strength leaves him. She yells, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He wakes up from his sleep, thinking, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But here's the most heartbreaking, absolutely crucial theological line in verse 20. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. You see, his strength was never his own. It was God's spirit. And because the vow was broken, that divine backing is gone. Because of this, he is immediately seized by the Philistines. They gouge out his eyes, brutally neutralizing his ability to fight or navigate. They take him all the way down to Gaza, which is incredibly ironic, as that's the very city where he previously tore the gates off their hinges. And they bind him with heavy bronze shackles. Finally, they set him to grinding grain in the prison, which was a humiliating, repetitive task, usually reserved for animals or the lowest slaves. The tragedy here is just swift and absolute. However, right after detailing this absolute despair, verse 22 provides this really brief, singular detail. It says, "But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved." It's a tiny, subtle hint. Why does this matter? Because while he is blinded and bound in that dark prison, his condition is slowly evolving. The growing hair symbolizes a second chance. It represents a potential return of his dedication, subtly hinting at the grace of God even in his absolute lowest moment. Section 6. The tragic end. We now reach verses 23 through 30, the ultimate climax of the chapter. The Philistine rulers assemble to offer a massive sacrifice to their god, Dagon, to celebrate. When the people see Samson, they praise their idol, chanting, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." They are basically taking Samson's personal failure and using it to glorify an idol, openly mocking the God of Israel. While they are in a high spirits, they shout, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they bring him out of the prison, and he performs for them. They stand him right among the pillars of the temple. The text tells us the temple is crowded with men and women, including all the rulers of the Philistines, and about 3,000 people are up on the roof watching. Samson asks the servant who is holding his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." Then in verse 28, Samson prays. He calls out to God, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." He reaches toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other, he shouts, "Let me die with the Philistines." He pushes with all his might, and down comes the massive temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Verse 31 brings us to the final aftermath of this devastating collapse. After the events in the ruined Philistine temple, his brothers and his father's whole family go down to retrieve his body. They bring him back up to his homeland and bury him between Zorah and Eshtal in the tomb of Manoah, his father. And the text provides closure to his life story with this simple summary statement: he had led Israel for 20 years. Despite the tragic errors and profound flaws, the text honors his role as a judge over the nation for 2 whole decades. And this brilliantly illustrates the incredibly steep arc we've witnessed throughout chapter 16. Just think about it. We see how he began, tearing loose the heavy city gates of Gaza with his bare hands, completely unrestrained and superhumanly strong. And then we see the tragic consequence of his choices: blinded, bound in bronze shackles, and grinding away in a prison before his final fatal act. There is a Hebrew word for sin, het, which literally translates to going astray or missing the mark. When we look at the simple meaning of this text, we see Samson doing exactly that. He strays from his Nazarite vow, he plays incredibly dangerous games with his secret, and he allows toxic emotional manipulation to separate him from his covenant with God. The practical life lessons here are profound. We learn about the incredible danger of taking our gifts for granted. We see the sheer destructiveness of relationships driven by ulterior motives, and we witness the heavy, inescapable consequences that follow when we lose sight of our core values and spiritual commitments. So we leave you with this final thought to reflect upon. What does Samson's fall tell us about the fragile line between immense strength and human vulnerability? It's a striking reminder that physical power is absolutely no match for internal weakness. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.